In the world of elite horse racing, legends don't just fade away, they're erased. Tonight, at the most exclusive auction of the year, one forgotten name would remind everyone exactly why some ghosts refuse to stay buried. But first, they would laugh. The scent of aged whiskey and polished leather hung thick in the evening air as the annual elite horse auction reached its crescendo. Beneath chandeliers worth more than most people's homes, the wealthiest breeders and investors in the industry gathered, their handshakes firm, their smiles calculated, their boots echoing against cobblestone that had witnessed fortunes made and lost. Among the sea of tailored suits and gleaming cufflinks, one figure moved like a shadow from another era. Ephraim Holloway walked with the deliberate steps of a man who had nothing left to lose. His worn wool coat had seen better decades, his scuffed boots told stories of countless stables, and his battered brown hat sat at an angle that suggested he'd stopped caring about appearances long ago. But his eyes, those weathered eyes, held a sharpness that cut through the pretense surrounding him. While others saw price tags and investment opportunities, Ephraim studied each horse with the intensity of a man reading ancient scripture. His calloused hands traced invisible lines in the air, measuring muscle and bone, searching for something the others couldn't see. Then she entered the ring. The golden chestnut stallion commanded attention like lightning splits the sky. Her shimmering coat caught the auction lights, her flowing pale mane moved like silk in water, and her powerful stance spoke of generations of champions flowing through her bloodline. The energy in the room shifted. This was why they were here. Opening bid 50,000, the auctioneer announced, his voice carrying over the sudden hush. Paddles rose like eager hands reaching for heaven. 60, 70, 85. The numbers climbed as seasoned buyers played their familiar game, each bid a chess move in a match they'd been playing for years. Then, without hesitation, without fanfare, Ephraim Holloway raised his hand. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of stunned pause that precedes either laughter or catastrophe. And then, like a dam breaking, the laughter came. Does he think he can even afford the saddle on that horse? Alistair Wren's voice carried the casual cruelty of youth who'd never known real loss. Cecil Langford adjusted his gold cufflinks with theatrical precision. Perhaps he's offering pocket change from an old barn somewhere. But Ephraim remained unmoved, his weathered face betraying nothing. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and retrieved something that would change everything. A single piece of paper that held the power to rewrite history. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether he could afford the horse. It was whether they could afford to keep underestimating him. Ephraim handed the check to the auctioneer with the casual indifference of a man buying morning coffee. The auctioneer's eyes swept across the paper once, twice, then his breath caught like a fishhook in his throat. His face drained of color as he processed not just the staggering amount but the signature that carried weight in circles these wealthy men could only dream of entering. The crowd, still buzzing with their own amusement, fell silent as the auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold," he announced, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening behind his eyes, to Mr. Ephraim Holloway. The laughter died like a snuffed candle. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not the cruel whispers of moments before, but something different, something that tasted like recognition and fear. These weren't men who had built their fortunes on sentiment, but they knew power when it stared them in the face. And right now it was staring. Cecil Langford's smug grin cracked like ice in spring. His mind raced through decades of racing history, sifting through half-remembered legends and whispered stories from retired breeders. Then realization struck him like a physical blow. "Ephraim Holloway," he murmured, the name falling from his lips like a prayer. "He's the one who bred Storm Regent." The name hit the crowd like electricity. Storm Regent, the champion no one could beat, the horse that had dominated tracks for years and broken records that still stood like monuments to greatness. But just as quickly as he'd risen to legendary status, Ephraim Holloway had vanished from the breeding world. No explanations, no grand farewell, just silence where a legend used to stand. Ephraim stepped forward, his weathered hand finding the stallion's muscular neck. The horse responded to his touch like an old song remembering its melody, ears flicking forward with immediate trust. This wasn't just a transaction. It was a reunion between two souls who understood what it meant to be born for something greater. "I see some of you remember my name," Ephraim said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of thunder rolling in the distance. Funny how quickly people forget who built the foundations they're standing on. Alistair Wren's jaw clenched so hard it could crack diamonds. His earlier amusement had curdled into something bitter and dangerous. "So what?" he snapped, forcing bravado into his voice like armor he didn't quite believe in. You had a few good years, but that was ancient history. What could a washed-up relic like you possibly want with a stallion of this caliber? Ephraim's smile was gentle, but his eyes held the patient wisdom of a man who had watched empires rise and fall from the backs of horses. Because a great horse deserves a great trainer, he said simply. And I'm the only man in this room who remembers what that truly means. But what they didn't know was that this moment, this humiliation, was just the beginning. The golden stallion, now christened Orion, stood beside Ephraim like a living statue carved from sunset and dreams. But Alistair Wren wasn't finished bleeding his pride in public. You talk a big game. Holloway. Alistair's voice carried across the courtyard like a whip crack, but bloodlines don't train themselves. That stallion may have fine breeding, but in the wrong hands, he's just another overpriced lawn ornament. Something shifted in Ephraim's weathered features. Not anger, but something far more dangerous, amusement. With practiced ease, he adjusted Orion's lead rope and let the horse step forward. The stallion moved like liquid power, every muscle coordinated in perfect harmony, responding to Ephraim's touch as if they'd shared a lifetime of conversations. Cecil Langford chuckled, folding his arms with theatrical dismissal. Anyone can make a horse walk in a straight line. You boys see price tags, Ephraim said, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent in barns where champions were born. I see souls. Then, with one swift motion that silenced every breath in the courtyard, he unclipped the lead rope entirely. The crowd tensed like a held breath. An unrestrained stallion, worth more than most of their estates, stood free, muscles rippling beneath his shimmering coat. They expected chaos. Rearing, bolting, the kind of disaster that would validate their assumptions about washed-up trainers and their foolish gambles. Instead, Orion remained perfectly still, his deep brown eyes locked onto Ephraim's weathered face. Then, without a single spoken command, something magical happened. The stallion moved toward his trainer with fluid precision, reading body language like poetry written in a language older than words. When Ephraim shifted his weight slightly, Orion mirrored him perfectly. When he turned, the horse followed like a shadow dancing with its owner. This wasn't training. This was trust forged in fire, understanding that transcended rope and bit. The crowd watched, spellbound and humbled, as man and horse moved together in a silent ballet that spoke of partnership, not dominance. That proves nothing, Alistair snapped, but his voice cracked like thin ice. A real horseman wouldn't waste time on parlor tricks. Ephraim's smile was patient, almost pitying. Then let's make it real. He stepped forward, his eyes meeting Alistair's with the calm certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Put your best horse against mine. 1 week from today. A race, the words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Alistair hesitated for only a heartbeat, but in that hesitation, everyone saw the crack in his armor. Fine, he said, straightening his shoulders like a man trying to convince himself of his own bravado. 1 week, and when my horse leaves yours eating dust, you'll regret ever setting foot in this place. Ephraim simply tipped his weathered hat, his smile never wavering. We'll see, son, we'll see. The challenge was set. In 7 days, legends would either be born or buried. 7 days later, the private racetrack at the Wren estate overflowed with spectators who had come to witness what they believed would be an inevitable humiliation. But as Ephraim led Orion to the starting line, something had changed in the stallion's bearing, a quiet confidence that made the crowd shift uneasily in their seats. Across from them, Alistair sat atop Blackfire, his prized stallion whose obsidian coat gleamed like polished armor. Undefeated, perfectly trained, a machine built for one purpose: winning. The odds were astronomically stacked against the old trainer and his unknown horse. Last chance to back out, Holloway, Alistair called, adjusting his gloves with practiced arrogance. Most men would have the sense to walk away. Ephraim's response was a gentle pat on Orion's neck. A good horse doesn't care about odds, son, and a good trainer doesn't need an audience to prove what he knows. The starting pistol cracked like thunder. Blackfire exploded from the line with mechanical precision, his powerful strides immediately establishing dominance. The crowd roared, already seeing their expected outcome. But Ephraim held Orion back, letting the stallion find his rhythm rather than burning energy in desperate pursuit. As they rounded the first turn, Blackfire was burning through his reserves at a blistering pace, impressive but unsustainable. Orion, meanwhile, moved with the fluid grace of water flowing downhill, his breathing steady, his stride controlled but building. Now, Ephraim whispered, Orion responded like lightning given form. With a burst of speed that defied physics, he closed the gap between them. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps as the golden stallion pulled alongside Blackfire, then impossibly, beautifully, began to pull ahead. Alistair's confident smirk crumbled as he felt Blackfire falter beneath him. The black stallion had spent his fire too early, his breathing now labored, his movements strained. Meanwhile, Orion only grew stronger, as if the race had awakened something primal and unstoppable within him. In the final stretch, with the finish line yards away, Orion surged forward with the power of all his forgotten bloodlines singing in harmony. He crossed the line not just as a winner, but as proof that greatness isn't bought, it's earned through understanding, patience, and the kind of trust that transcends words. The silence that followed was deafening. Then the world exploded into chaos. Gasps, cheers, and the sound of assumptions crashing to earth like fallen angels. Ephraim dismounted slowly, his weathered hand finding Orion's neck as the stallion tossed his head in quiet triumph. As he led his champion toward the stables, he passed Alistair, who sat frozen in defeat. "Told you we'd see," Ephraim said simply. Behind them, the crowd buzzed with electric energy, knowing they had witnessed something rare, the moment when a legend remembered who he was and reminded the world why some names are never truly forgotten. Greatness, it turned out, had simply been waiting for the right moment to return.